Well, we're live.
We're live. We're
So,
live.
Hello,
We're live.
everybody.
Hello.
Please
Wait, why
excuse
can't-
Richard while he drinks something without advertising.
Why are we not supposed to drink? I'm gonna drink.
Go for it. It's a free podcast. You support
Pro
democracy
democracy,
here.
even.
Yeah. So welcome to the show, everybody. Today we're very excited to have Kevin Gostola and Richard Medhurst, two excellent journalists who have been two of my favorite journalists who have been covering the Assange trial or the U.S. appeal to the non-extradition of Julian Assange from the UK to the United States. I thought that it would be such an amazing idea to have both of them on together. Because they've both been covering this and just get a really informed conversation started. It seems that a competitor and friend of mine, Katie Halper, has already done that. So thank you, Katie, for stealing my idea before I announced it. But welcome to the show, guys.
But Alex, she put that behind a paywall for her subscribers, so you have a chance to get an edge on her if you make some of this more widely available.
Yeah, well, this is unfortunately paywalled as well, but I promise you, Katie's podcast is doing very well. So come over to us.
Yeah, we'll do that for you. We'll do that for you.
All right. So Kevin is the editor of Shadowproof. Richard, what don't you do, man? You got your own show. You got a press TV show. Really awesome, informative viewing experience. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us. It's really a pleasure to be invited on to talk about this and to be here with Kevin. It's really great. And yeah, what more can I say? We're gonna make sure that as many people as possible watch this, just as with Katie's and everything, because the Assange thing, if there's no coverage, and if there is coverage, it's dishonest coverage. I was seeing something from the BBC. They uploaded it 5 days ago, so just before or just on the cusp of the High Court appeal. And I mean, this is an astonishing video because what they talk about in it, they kind of like try to talk about the case as if the extradition hearing was just about to begin. So, they're repeating all these lies and smears, and it's just a hatchet job about Assange. And then there's like just one sentence about his health. And now, don't get me wrong, I would very much prefer that we did not focus on his health because, of course, it's a private matter. It shouldn't be just about his health, like that he's not extradited. He should not be extradited because it's wrong, But the way they did it in the BBC was kind of just like going through all these smears, like asking if, WikiLeaks harmed people. And it's just crazy. You've got in the background, like the collateral murder video playing where there's like a gunship killing Iraqi civilians and two Reuters journalists. And he's worried about whether WikiLeaks hurt anyone, which, I mean, has been debunked by the United States' own Department of Defense. So, it's like I said, it's important to talk about this. I don't think we can overstate that enough.
And you had written an article recently saying that this trial was essentially hinging on proving Assange having to prove how suicidal he is. And to me, this seems so absurd.
Yeah, it is. Just like even without Julian Assange in the picture and the fact that it's criminalizing journalism, like just the things that they say in the courtroom is so insulting to anyone who struggled with mental health. It's insulting to the medical experts themselves, who are some of the best in the world, and they're coming there and being lectured by a lawyer. He's not a doctor, I think he's doing it on purpose. He says absurd things like, Julian asked for milk and oranges or something, and like, what does it have to do with anything? Who cares what he's consuming? So yeah, it does hinge on that. Unfortunately, it's gotten to a point where it's just about his health, but it shouldn't just be about that. And this is why we see what's so wrong with the decision in January. So like it was bittersweet. It's like, great, the judge blocked the extradition, but she only did it on health grounds. And now we're seeing in court why this is so bad, because there's nothing about journalism. There's nothing about free speech, journalistic freedoms, about how this criminalizes journalism. Nothing. It's all about his health. And even then it's insulting and completely, like if Assange is suicidal, who made him suicidal? Who triggered and brought on all this mental illness. You know, it's the persecution. Anyone would be mentally ill or suffer to a greater degree from their mental illness after a political persecution that lasts a decade, of course, you know. But yeah, I mean, that's not the only reason he shouldn't be extradited, of course.
Yeah, an actual thing that we heard during the proceedings came from the defense team, where they had to say people with autism spectrum disorder have had girlfriends too. I mean, we see throughout these proceedings so many examples of the stigmatization of people with mental health issues. And so that's been a reality. And what Richard's pointing to is really important, because the way in which Vanessa Barretzer ruled, we're seeing before the High Court of Justice, it's tenuous. It can fall apart pretty quickly. There are things that the U.S. government can try. The chief one being this offering of diplomatic assurances to completely get around all the concerns that the judge had. And it may work. That's the really unfortunate and dismal part of the legal case against Julian Assange, is that in the end, it may end up being persuasive enough to the High Court of Justice to overturn all the work that the district judge did on this very small part, where she looked at the evidence and determined it would be oppressive to extradite Julian Assange.
So I want to ask, just to clarify, I mean, last week the U.S. appeal against the non-extradition started. How long does this go on for, and what is the prosecution's argument look like?
Well, do you have a crystal ball? Because the problem is it could go on forever. That's kind of the point, you know. That's to torture him, and they know this. They know this, of course. That it takes a long time. And I mean, what the prosecution's arguments are? Well, basically, they're saying that they're appealing on 5 grounds, right? But just to sum it up, it's on 2 subjects mainly: his health and the assurances that Kevin just pointed to. And so, you know, I share Kevin's fears that this just might work with the assurances, because, you know, they're saying that the phrase was, these are not dished out like Smarties. They said these are diplomatic assurances. They're not just any assurances, you know. And so they're trying to say that the United States has never broken diplomatic assurances. I'm not sure that's true. But anyway, when it comes to the health aspect, they're saying that, you know, the medical expert Koppelman misled the court, which, I mean, how much time do you have? Because I think Kevin and I can go really into detail. But
we have time, and I mean, that's why we wanted both of you guys on to really, you know, dig into the ground here.
Yeah, so they're saying that he misled the court, which again I find this incredible, because he didn't mislead he didn't mislead the court at all. They're accusing him of that because in his first psychiatric evaluation, he didn't disclose the name of Assange's partner, Stella Morris, and that they had 2 children, which again has nothing to do with psychiatry. Even the judge herself, she said she understood why he did it. She said it was an understandable human response to Miss Morris' understandable predicament. So it's basically, she was aware, the tabloid press, the British press, will tear this relationship apart. They will attack them. And not to mention, you have the CIA and other 3-letter agencies interested. So she got it. And even despite that, you know, she gave the most weight to his medical testimony, even in spite of that. So that they're not happy, of course, the prosecution. They're saying this is unacceptable. You should either completely exclude it, it should be inadmissible, or it should be given less weight. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, in court, when the judges asked for clarification, which they want, I think they said that they wanted it to be given less weight, not to completely exclude it. But yeah, that's one of the grounds. The other ground, I think, so just to sum up the 5 grounds, they're saying also that Assange does not meet the threshold for blocking an extradition. They say that he cannot control, that basically their argument is, if you cannot control the impulse to commit suicide, then it's okay not to extradite you. Then you're too unfit. You're too mentally unfit. But they're saying Assange can control it. So he's not so suicidal that he cannot be extradited. And again, this is not true. If according to the medical experts, it's true that only one of them, Koppelman, said this about Assange, but well, that's still one doctor who's saying that, right? So it goes against what the prosecutors are trying to say. And nevertheless, all 5 doctors, even the ones called by the prosecution, agree that Assange has they agree he has depression and a risk of suicide, but to varying degrees, right? So, for example, Fazel, who's called by the prosecution, he makes this absurd argument that Assange is not at high risk of suicide because to be at high risk of suicide, you have to compare him to other prisoners in the same age group and sex. Which, I mean, this is they're really trying to wiggle out of this, and I think this is an absurd argument because it's so dismissive and insulting to Julian and to, I think, anyone who's struggled with mental health. And also even the defense said, well, the US has a prison population 7 times higher, so you can't you have people locked up for a joint of marijuana, so it's not like you can make an accurate comparison there. Yeah, and I mean, when we look at the assurances that Kevin brought up, they're saying that he won't be placed in SAMs, special administrative measures, and he won't go to ADX Florence in Colorado, and he can maybe serve a sentence in Australia. But the defense, they showed all these examples where the United States lied. They told people that they won't put them in SAMs or ADX, and then once they got to the United States, they were sent there. And I think they're trying to do this again because the assurances have been given by the prosecutors, not the Department of Justice. And the lawyers for Assange pointed this out, right? So if Assange is extradited, he can get there, and then the DOJ says, we never agreed to this. That was the prosecutors, I mean, this is so dishonest. It's unbelievable how they're trying to get away with this. And I think the lawyers made a great point, Assange's lawyers, that even if you don't put Assange in some hellhole like ADX Florence or special administrative measures, they have other things they can put him in. It's not like the United States has any shortage of horrific prison conditions. There's a whole prison industry in the US, and they have things like special housing units, communications management units. I think it was Daniel Hale, I think, was put into one of those Kevin was talking about last time. So, I mean, they're very creative. So the notion here is that no matter what assurances the prosecution give, if Assange is taken to the US, he will be put in a hellhole. Call it whatever you like. Call it ADX, call it SFX. It doesn't matter. He's going to be put into a hellhole, whether it's a special housing unit. It doesn't matter. They will come up with something. That's very important to understand because the agency responsible for deciding SAMs, just if we look at SAMs, is the CIA. The CIA were talking about killing this guy. Assange published documents from the CIA. You think they won't put him in SAMs? Come on. This is just naive to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, well, the Justice Department, the Attorney General signs off, but the CIA gets to make a formal recommendation to the Justice Department and say, we want you to designate him for SAMs because we're afraid that he would breach U.S. national security and publish classified information that would put us at risk. And that's the way that they view. I mean, we need to remember that almost everything that the U.S. government has ever said in response to a WikiLeaks publication is that it is a threat to national security without giving any evidence whatsoever. They say things like WikiLeaks has blood on their hands, like Richard said at the top. And to speak in those terms and believe that the CIA is not going to advocate for the harshest restrictions is it's not believable. You just can't believe that the CIA is going to sit back and let Julian Assange go into general population in a jail if he's awaiting trial or in a federal prison were he to be convicted. And I'd say on Kopelman, so the few things I want to add to what Richard laid out there is that Kopelman is the doctor. The reason why he's the one doctor who gets to be taken seriously when he says that Julian Assange would not be able to resist his suicidal impulses is because he's the doctor who saw him the most between May 2019 and December 2019. So he's the person who is best equipped to assess Julian Assange's state as a human being right now and how it's been destroyed and the toll that arbitrary detention has taken on him the last decade plus that he's been going through this ordeal that has been thrust upon him by the U.S. government waging this war on WikiLeaks. And then to talk about the CMUs, this is really important. So when you look at the assurances about prison conditions for, let's say, ADX Florence or the SAMs, what is not there in the assurances is an assurance that we will not place him in a communications management unit. And a communications management unit, in fact, is something that Gordon Kromberg, the lead prosecutor on this, has told the high court, as well as the lower court for where Vanessa Barretzer rule has said it is possible that Julian Assange would be put. And why is that important? Because as Richard was mentioning, Daniel Hale, this drone whistleblower, was transferred to a CMU in Marion, Illinois. Now, these are treated like little gitmos in the United States. There's one in Terre Haute and there's one in Marion, Illinois. These are state penitentiaries. These are U.S. penitentiaries. And there you get put in this wing for CMU where they get to basically restrict all your communications. And they get to prevent you from having non-contact visits. So that means that Julian Assange would not be able to hug or kiss his children or his partner, Stella Morris, if they came to visit him in a CMU, whether it was Terre Haute or Marion. An FBI agent has to be available when you want to make a phone call. And the Bureau of Prisons has the ability to restrict who you call. And they can limit it to immediate family. So there are a whole range of people who could be in Assange's support network who he would never have a chance to talk to once he was put in a CMU. This is already happening to Daniel Hale, who had whistleblowers that supported him before he was convicted. And then now they're not on his list and he can't talk to them, like John Kiriakou, a CIA whistleblower. So this is something we have to consider of the sort of restrictions that will be imposed that will remove the support network, which is helping him to deal with those suicidal impulses while he is in Belmarsh, the people who are there to ensure that nothing worse happens. They say this phrase protective factors when talking about Belmarsh because there are aspects of his confinement in Belmarsh that are noticeably better than what they would be in the United States. That is, there's a small group of staff that is giving him around the clock attention would he need it, as somebody who is designated for this program due to his mental health. That doesn't exist in the United States. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. No matter what Gordon Kromberg wants to claim to the High Court of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons goes out of its way to figure out why prisoners do not need medical care and then refuse to give it. And there's even something I just noticed in Kromberg's submission to the court where he's talking about the conditions of prisons. He describes Bureau of Prisons healthcare as what you get on your health insurance plan. Now, anybody who knows anything about health insurance in the United States would laugh at that, and especially when comparing it to the way people receive treatment in European countries, they would laugh hysterically because health insurance is set up to not provide care. It is, they want to pay the least amount of money for the least amount of care. And if you ask for additional care, then you have to fund it out of pocket. Well, Assange isn't going to be able to get care out of pocket while he's in prison. And he's also not going to be able to arrange for it because they'd have to give him permission to leave the prison to go get that medical care. So he's basically out of luck. And so there's no way you can even believe that this assurance about medical care has anything reasonable behind it. It's and people will say for each of these assurances, I don't have to convince the people who are participating in this stream, but people will say that all of these have loopholes that you can drive a truck through. And that is why they should not be taken seriously. We haven't gotten to the Australia assurance, so we should just briefly mention, and then I'll let Richard or you guys can ask other questions if you want. But there's this thing about how Julian Assange could be transferred to Australia because he's an Australian citizen, the only time that they really seem to care that he's an Australian citizen and not a U.S. citizen, and that so he could apply for a prisoner transfer to Australia to serve his sentence if he's convicted. But I just want to quickly say the reason why this is ridiculous is laid out by the legal team as such. That basically, in order to do this, the Australian government has to consent to it. And there's no indication that Australia would ever be open to this prisoner transfer. And then if they have some problem politically, like I imagine there might need to be some changes in the people who are running the country for this to happen. But if they think that the U.S. mounted a political case and they don't want to be involved in this, they could say, no, we don't want Assange to be moved to our country to be imprisoned. We don't think we could actually even uphold the terms of this because you have a political prisoner. So then they could say, we don't want him to be extradited to or we don't want him to be transferred to our country. And then the US would just leave him in a prison because they couldn't get a guarantee from the Australian government that they would keep him imprisoned. So I mean, there's all sorts of problems with what the US government is claiming to this high court.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I both know from our work on prisons here that, Assange would probably not last very long, whether it's vindictive guards hired by whoever, it's more than likely that something would happen to him inside the United States. I can't speak for Australia, but I suspect it's much the same, right? So you guys have no kind of insight onto when a ruling might come down on this?
I mean,
well,
the understanding was that it could take weeks or months, just for the appeal court.
I mean, do you want to put something on screen here and show people what we're looking at as far as the path forward? We did this. I did this with
fancy,
Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a plethora of possible outcomes. And Kevin pulled up this really nice.
Here. So there's an image there that comes from an attorney, I think maybe working with the Assange team in some capacity, but Kelly Tranter is actually based in Australia. If you're able to open it up and do a share screen and show people who are watching, there's a graphic with a flow chart that shows the different ways that this could unfold in the next several years. And it's not good for Julian Assange. It shows the different routes that this case could go. And it's even like before it would get to the United States. And this is what we're talking about when Richard or myself say punishment by process, that this keeps him in confinement while this is all unfolding. He's denied bail. And an important point to make while you're trying to pull this up is...
I have no idea how to do that. Did you send it to me somewhere? Or
I put it in the private chat.
It's in the private chat in the StreamYard chat.
Unless I have the ability to do it, I could try. Do you want me to try to do it?
Yeah, if you could, because I'm looking at the private chat in the StreamYard and I don't see it. I apologize to our viewers for this.
All right. I don't know. I mean, let's see. I think you might have given me the ability to do it. Let's see if it lets me do it. You just allowed me to do it. Okay, so let me do it. I'll do it this way. So here you go.
Wow.
So this is, and then I'm going to make it bigger and then where I'm circling here, this is the appeal. You see, this is appeals to the high court. This is where we're at. We're also down here, U.S. appeals to the high court. So the routes that we can go, we could see it dismissed. If it's dismissed, we obviously know that the United States won't be happy. They're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. If it goes to if the high court says we're going to allow the assurances, we're going to allow the extradition, it is possible it gets kicked back down to the district court, and not necessarily Vanessa Baretzer, but another district judge reviews the case. And then if they're going to allow the assurances, the other thing they might do is Julian Assange's team will want to challenge those assurances because they were not brought up during the extradition. They were not brought up during the extradition hearing in September 2020, the one that lasted a month. These people who came before the witnesses, the evidence, none of it had anything to do with the assurances, and the U.S. government didn't put forward any diplomatic assurances because they really believed that there was nothing about U.S. prison conditions that said there would be any problem with putting him in the U.S., that it would be humane. They believed that their arguments convinced the judge that it would all be humane. And so the team for Assange wants to be able to call people and challenge those assurances, which they should do. They're entitled to have that hearing, but it's going to prolong all of this. And it means it would probably go back down to here to the district court, and then the district court would rule. And based on that ruling, then there'd be an appeal to the high court. And again, we start this all over. We go back to the Supreme Court. You can see how like this will take a very long time. And we're not even getting to the part where he gets his extradition is signed off on and he's sent to the United States.
Yeah, it's horrific, honestly. You know, I spoke to Gary McKinnon. Gary, you know, he perpetrated what is called the biggest computer hack of all time. He hacked the DOD, NASA, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, everything. And they did the same thing that they're doing with Assange. They trumped up the charges. They said that he caused millions of dollars in damages. I mean, even calling it a hack is a bit. There were no passwords on the administrator accounts, so you know anyone could just waltz in. And he said that there were other people connected. And my point here is that this was just right around the time where they were finalizing the extradition treaty that you have between the U.S. and the U.K. So this is during the Blair and Bush era, and he was sort of the one of the first people to get slapped with that. Although again, they were starting to go after him before it was even enacted, but his battle lasted 10 years, you know, and I think he exhausted all his options. If I recall correctly, it made its way to the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it, actually. And then he got lucky, and Theresa May, the Home Secretary at the time, she withdrew the extradition. So, I mean, that's, you know, it's a saving grace. It's probably one of the only good things she's ever done. But, you know, if
that was on mental health grounds. That was on mental health grounds.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it was again about Asperger's and mental health grounds, as Kevin correctly puts it. And Lori Love, of course, you know, the same thing, a long extradition battle. And I mean, just given the pattern, you know, Gary McKinnon and Lori Love, they spent years and years and years going through this tedious, exhausting, horrific process, you know. And Assange, I think, just politically speaking, has a way bigger target on his back. So if they did that to Gary McKinnon and Lori Love, what are they going to do to Assange? You know, they're really like all in, and you can see that Trump goes out and Biden comes in, and he's picking up right where Trump left off. There's no remorse, there's no second thoughts. It's just keep going with it. And something interesting I saw in that Yahoo News investigation. There's this line where, you know, they're talking about how the CIA was discussing plans to potentially kidnap or poison Assange. And then there's this line that this predated Mike Pompeo's arrival at the CIA. I wonder what that means concretely. Like predates by how much? Like, you know, are we talking about it's going back to the Obama administration? Because there's this whole point that was made in the extradition hearing that, you know, they were saying that the defense were saying that the Obama administration did not prosecute Julian because they saw that this would clearly, you know, they'd have to prosecute the New York Times. This would criminalize journalism. And the prosecution made the argument that, yes, Obama did not prosecute Julian, but he didn't explicitly rule it out either, right? So there's this whole talk. And when I'm seeing that these, you know, it's just funny when you put that together with this line that says it predated Mike Pompeo. I was just curious by how long, because, you know, if they were discussing this during the Obama administration, well, what do I need to say? But yeah, it's just really process, a punishment by process. And you know, in Belmarsh prison, Kevin is right. It is somewhat better than what he would have in the U.S. But you know, Belmarsh prison is still, you know, it's a category A. It's a maximum security prison in England. It's the most famous one. And just to give you some context, I remember, I think this is when Cameron was prime minister. You had a Jordanian cleric called Abu Qatada, and you know, he was considered, I think his nickname or something was like Bin Laden's right-hand man in Europe or something. You know, he's a very senior figure in Al Qaeda, and he was in Belmarsh prison, and they let him out. They let him out on house arrest. So, you know, they're letting people from Al Qaeda out of this prison on house arrest, but they won't let Julian Assange out. What does that tell you? What does that tell you?
Did they send him to Syria as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, given their politics on Syria, I'm almost not that surprised. But I mean, this
right?
whole no, exactly, and it's like, I mean, we've kind of seen, like, I mean, this is a little off topic, but I do really think that like they will be softer on like literal jihadis and like the UK or in the US than they will be on like anyone that threatens the empire, seriously threatens the empire. And if you like even take a step back, the whole thing here looks really twisted. Like even the premise that we need to, you know, that like, oh, if he's suicidal, then he doesn't go to this prison, but if he's not, then he can go to, like, even that whole premise just seems really absurd and not really aligned with what the legal system is, you know, preaching itself, or like as the legal system in the UK or in the West portrays itself to be. It's actually very, it's very much a show trial. There's no like like what is going to be achieved by even having him in prison? It's just to send a message.
Exactly.
Let me throw something else out there. Is it okay?
I just want to add one last thing about Abu Qatada, because we're talking about extradition. You know, Jordan wanted to extradite him from the UK, and there was this whole conversation in the UK and specifically from the EU that you can't extradite him because the evidence obtained was obtained through torture, right? So if you went to trial in Jordan for these bombings, it was 2 of them. You know, he'd be put on trial with tainted evidence. So you know what the UK did? They drafted a whole brand new extradition treaty for this terrorist, just to make sure that if he's extradited, nothing will be used against him. And as you can probably guess, he went to Jordan, and he's a free man now. So, you know, there you go. That's how the UK and the US treat Al-Qaeda and how they treat journalists. I think is a stark contrast.
Kevin, if you want to make your point, and then after that, I'm going to end the Twitter live stream and move exclusively over to Rockfin to finish off this conversation. There's a lot more to come, so I hope you guys join us there.
So just one last thing on this tragedy and farce before we move over. So one thing that has been stated about the assurances from this Crown Prosecution Service, and they're being pushed to say this by Gordon Kromberg, is that these are binding diplomatic assurances. They're binding in that if they are violated, Julian Assange would be able to challenge them. Now, how do they think that Julian Assange can challenge them? They say he could go to, this is where I think it's a laugh riot. He could go to the UK government and say that he's upset that the US government has violated these assurances. And these are like the last people who are going to give any shits about what Julian Assange is saying the US government has done to him. I mean, the fact of the matter is the UK government, we find out through the Yahoo News report, is responsible for keeping the bail jumping charge on his record as a service so that they would have a pretext to take him into custody and arrest him and hold him for as long as was necessary so that then he could be extradited and brought to the United States. So the bail jumping charge, this idea that, you know, when he was pursued by Sweden for the sexual allegations that, you know, obviously that's a whole separate other matter that could fill 2 hours. And we've moved way beyond that at this point. But Niels Meltzer did some really good documentation of the due process violations inherent in that case. But, you know, he's treated as a fugitive simply for seeking out political asylum from Ecuador and entering that embassy. And that's where they get this idea that he jumped bail. And so then from that point onward, the UK basically has him in their clutches. You know, anytime he exits the embassy, they're going to be able to arrest him and take him into detention. So that's a service to the United States. So if you think they're going to act independently of the US government and advocate for him while he is being mistreated or abused in the United States, then you're really gullible. You're truly a gullible person.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could write a letter to Prince Harry or something. But with that, I'm gonna end the Twitter live stream. I hope that you guys join us on Rockfin. It's rokfin.com/prodempod. There's a lot more to come, so please join us there.